You're listening to Damascus Radio, the broadcasting service of the Syrian Arab Republic. And now stay tuned for the news.
Good evening, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to our news bulletin for tonight, to be presented jointly by Bassem Bakdash and Rashid Haidar. President Bashar al-Assad received on Friday evening a cable from the first Sharia judge in Damascus, Mahmoud al-Ma'rawi, confirming that Sunday, June the 29th, is the first day of the holy month of Ramadan. The judge congratulated President al-Assad on this occasion, praying that Ramadan will bring good things and blessings to the Syrian people and to the Arab and Islamic nations and herald Syria's victory. On this occasion, President al-Assad received congratulatory cables from the Minister of Religious Endowments, Dr. Muhammad al-Sayyid, who prayed to God to protect Syria from its enemies and empower the Syrian army to defeat terrorism, praying for the rest of the martyrs' souls. In a similar cable, Justice Minister Naim al-Ahmad congratulated President al-Assad and voiced hope that the Syrian Arab army will defeat the terrorists and bring security back to the homeland. Likewise, the Grand Mufti of the Republic, Ahmed Badruddin Hassoun, said in a congratulatory cable that this Ramadan marks over the 3 years of Syria standing strong in the face of extremism and terrorism and all its enemies, and Ramadan heralds a brighter future for Syria and its people. Deputy Prime Minister, Foreign Expatriate Minister Walid let me read that again. Russian Deputy Foreign Minister Sergei Ryabkov has said that Syria would be able to deter any aggression despite its elimination of chemical weapons, stressing that his country appreciates the responsible decision taken by Syria regarding the chemical weapons, affirming that Russia is working with the international community to make the region free of weapons of mass destruction. He said that at a press conference held in Damascus that terrorism is absolutely unjustifiable, stressing that Russia stands in the face of terrorism targeting the region. He went on to say that the wave of terrorism poses a threat to many countries, and it would leave catastrophic repercussions if countries do not cooperate to confront it and put an end to it, urging the United States and its allies to take serious steps in this domain. Ryabkov said that there is no alternative to the political process for solving the crisis in country in Syria, which could be carried out through dialogue, wishing that Syria would overcome obstacles and remain united and prosperous. Deputy Prime Minister, Foreign Expatriate Minister Walid Muallim had earlier discussed with the Russian Deputy Foreign Minister Ryabkov means to bolster bilateral relations and Syria's fulfillment of the disposal of chemical weapons. Minister al-Muallim expressed gratitude to the Russian government and people for its stances regarding Syria, stressing that the most pressing risk in the Middle East is terrorism, which requires coordinated efforts of the international community to counter it. On his part, Ryabkov congratulated the Syrians for the completion of the presidential elections and President al-Assad's winning the elections, conveying a message from Russia's Foreign Minister Sergei Lavrov, in which he congratulated al-Muallim on the completion of removing all chemical weapons out of the country. He described the process as unprecedented for its circumstances, volume, and time frame. Ryabkov had earlier held a meeting with Deputy Foreign and Expatriate Minister Dr. Faisal Maqdad, in which the disposal of chemical weapons was tackled, in addition to bilateral relations and issues of mutual concern. Bassem?
Thank you, Rashid. Army units carried out several operations today against terrorists' dens and gatherings, killing many and injuring others in several areas around the country. Army units in Aleppo killed a number of terrorists and destroyed their weapons in Bani Zaid, Al-Haydariya, Al-Mansura, Hanano, Maskana, Babis, and the industrial city in the countryside. In Al-Qunaitwa, an army unit destroyed several vehicles with all terrorists inside in the villages of Ain al-Tine, Al-Aliya, Tell al-Mahas, Tell al-Jabiya, and Al-Hajja. Meanwhile, army units targeted terrorists' gatherings in the villages of Hurata, Sharshuh, and Al-Tiba in Homs countryside, killing many terrorists and injuring others. In Daraa countryside, units of the Syrian Arab Army eliminated scores of terrorists. Some of them are foreigners in Inkhel town and destroyed their weapons. In Idlib province, the army units destroyed a terrorist den in Jabal al-Zawiya Mount area and eliminated scores of terrorists. Some of them are foreigners. The forces also destroyed a weapon cache and a number of vehicles equipped with heavy machine guns. And in Hasaka, units of the armed forces targeted terrorists' gatherings in the areas of Sabah al-Khair and Abyad, leaving numbers of terrorists dead or wounded and destroyed their weapons and ammunition. Governor of Homs Talal al-Barazi has stressed that Al-War neighborhood in Homs province is witnessing positive settlement that paves the ground for restoring security and stability and allows the delivery of basic aid into the neighborhood. In a statement to journalists, Governor al-Barazi pointed out that what is happening is based on President Bashar al-Assad's directives to bolster national reconciliation. Barazi added that the return of the kidnapped people to their families is a major part of any national reconciliation, noting that through amity and reconciliation, the Syrians will gain victory over sedition and terrorism. Deputy Foreign and Expatriates Minister Dr. Faisal Mekdad has stressed that Syria has been exposed to a direct aggression for more than 3 years, with the aim of demolishing it and changing its political regime by force. More details are in this following report.
Deputy Foreign and Expatriates Minister Dr. Faisal Mekdad has stressed that Syria has been exposed to a direct aggression for more than 3 years with the aim of demolishing it and changing its political regime by force. In an article published by the Lebanese Al-Bina newspaper today, Mekdad said, "The use of the word aggression to describe what's going on in Syria is the accurate expression to the events of the killing, demolishing and foreign interference in this country." Mekdad criticized the vocabularies and terms used by the West to describe what's going on in Syria, like the crisis, the dilemma, the civil war, or lots of other vocabularies, asserting that these terms don't reflect the reality of what's going on in Syria. He reiterated that what Syria is being exposed to could be classified as a foreign aggression, particularly that the Syrian people have become aware of these wrong concepts when the Syrian people flocked into the streets to participate in the presidential elections inside and outside Syria to show support for their leadership and army. The Deputy Foreign and Expatriates Minister slammed the dirty role of the Arab League in serving the Western countries through calling on NATO for military interference in an Arab independent country. Mekdad said, "The blind aggression on Syria is an aggression on the UN Charter and the international and humanitarian law," asserting that Syria has sent more than 300 letters to the UN Security Council and the UN Secretary General, in which it illustrated that the events in Syria are an aggression, terrorism, and a flagrant violation of the resolutions of the UN Security Council and UN General Assembly.
Syria's permanent representative to the UN, Dr. Bashar Jafari, has criticized a statement made by the UN Under-Secretary General for Humanitarian Affairs and Emergency Relief Coordinator, Valerie Amos, describing it as out of context. Jafari was speaking during a United Nations Security Council session to discuss the implementation of the Security Council Resolution 2139 on humanitarian aid delivery in Syria. Jafari particularly lashed out at using the term armed opposition in the report to refer to organizations that the UN Security Council designated as terrorist groups, describing it as scandalous. Syria's permanent representative to the UN expressed bewilderment at the magnified and exaggerated numbers of the needy in Syria compared to previous reports, saying that their numbers have jumped out of the blue, according to the report, to become 10.8 million, up by 1.5 million from the previous reports. Jafari said in the report, furthermore, it ignores the root cause behind the worsening humanitarian situation in Syria, which is the emergence and rising terrorist activities. Russia's permanent representative to the UN, Vitaly Churkin, on his part, has stressed that Russia will prevent the adoption of a humanitarian resolution threatening sanctions against Syria at the UN Security Council. Churkin was quoted by Russia Today, a website, as criticizing in a statement on Thursday the attempts to rely on Chapter 7 of the UN Charter, which allows the use of force and sanctions, and a draft resolution on humanitarian aid delivery to Syria. These attempts, he said, don't seek concrete humanitarian outcomes, but rather they seek practicing more political pressure on the Syrian government. Churkin struck a relevant note when he advised the U.S. to spend its money, which it announced it will allocate to moderate opposition terrorists in Syria, on more useful things. Back to Bassem for more news.
Thank you very much, Rashid. The Iraqi armed forces started today a big operation to cleanse Tikrit city in Salahuddin Governorate from the terrorists of the so-called the Islamic State in Iraq and Sham, or ISIS, that is belonging to the terrorist Al-Qaeda organization, as the army used hundreds of vehicles and thousands of soldiers, in addition to an engineering team working on clearing the road from explosives and roadside bombs. Sources asserted that the Iraqi forces have reached Tigris district and eventually clashed with elements of the ISIS organization. The Iraqi forces had earlier last Thursday controlled Tikrit University north of the city after a commandos operation was carried out by the special forces, which was followed by clashes with terrorists that paved the way for the land operation today. Israeli occupation planes renewed early today their attacks on Gaza Strip, launching raids on sites south of Gaza Strip. The Palestinian news agency MAN, or together in English, reported that an Israeli helicopter fired rockets on several regions in Gaza Strip without reporting any casualties. 2 Palestinians had earlier been martyred and 3 others wounded yesterday afternoon in an Israeli shelling that targeted a civilian car in the beach camp west of Gaza City. Spiritual leader of the Islamic Iranian Revolution, Sayyid Ali Khamenei, has warned against the conspiracies that aim at inciting a sectarian war in the region, saying that what is currently happening in Iraq is not a sectarian war, but rather a war between the pro- and anti-terrorism sides, as it is in fact a struggle between advocates of the Western American agendas and those who believe in the independence of peoples. In a meeting with a number of the 1981 martyrs' families in Tehran, Khamenei added that the enemies wish to inflame a sectarian war in the region to achieve their interests at the expense of the region's peoples, asserting that the failure of the enemy's conspiracies in this regard has been clear, pointing out that all the attacks of the international arrogance against the Iranian people will definitely fail. Khamenei called the Iranian people and officials to stay awake to the schemes of enemies. Back to you, Rashid.
Thank you very much, Basim. Nicely over to our final item. The Information Office of the Popular Republic of Lugansk has announced that the Popular Defense Forces affiliated to it will keep on controlling the 3 border crossings with Russia following the agreement today between the delegations of the Popular Republics of Lugansk and Donetsk on the one hand and the representatives of the Ukrainian authorities on the other, in order to extend the ceasefire on both sides until the end of this month. Russian Foreign Minister Sergei Lavrov had earlier asserted yesterday in a phone call with his U.S. counterpart John Kerry the need to extend the ceasefire and to launch negotiations directly between the 2 conflicted sides in Ukraine as soon as possible, based on the preliminary consultations carried out by the representatives of Kiev and regions in southeastern Ukraine in Donetsk city on the 23rd of June. On the other hand, the head of the Foreign Affairs Committee at the Russian Duma Council, Alexei Poshkov, refused to approve of a draft resolution listed in the agenda of the Parliamentary Society session for the European Security and Cooperation Organization that denounces Russia, asserting that it is provocative. In a speech delivered before the Permanent Committee session for the organization, opened today in the Azerbaijan capital city, Poshkov said that We oppose this item of the agenda as it does not reflect the situation in Ukraine, and we furthermore consider it as provocative, and I suggest to omit it from the session's agenda, bringing to mind that the US has ignored all the international principles when it intervened militarily in Iraq, and that the organization is using a double standard policy.
With that last item, ladies and gentlemen, that came from Ukraine, we end our news for tonight. Thank you very much for joining us. Damascus Radio presents News and Views.
Ladies and gentlemen, good evening. What Lakhdar al-Brahimi stated in his latest interview with the German newspaper Der Spiegel about the terrorist group's use of the chemical weapons in Khan al-Assad in Aleppo is not surprising. Indeed, it is the truth that the entire world completely knows, without any doubt, that the Ghan's government had supplied the terrorists in Khan al-Assad with the chemical weapons supported by the major parties of the conspiracy against Syria people and the state. In addition, we used to hear many important statements and confessions by word of official figures after the end of the mission in Syria. Before al-Brahimi, there was Kofi Annan, and before there was Ad-Dabi, who was forced by Qatar to leave his mission in Syria. On the other hand, Annan's statements were more important than those stated recently by Ibrahimi, who did not dare tell the truth about what is going on in Syria when he was in his mission. In fact, Annan was more courageous and clearer when he signed from his mission in Syria, protesting against the Western powers' interference to obstruct his work. Annan has admitted that there was a global conspiracy against Syria. He also said the entire world had abandoned the Syrian people because of the proxy war which was taking place in Syria. Annan also noted in his statements that there are armed terrorist groups fighting in Syria, and they are linked to the regional and Western powers led by the US. Annan added that these great powers are seeking to control the UN resolutions about the crisis in Syria. According to Brahimi, and during his mission in Syria, he did not play any impartial or neutral role, and he did not even try to find a solution to what is happening in Syria. Indeed, Ibrahimi's stances are not strange because he already obeys the orders of his monitors who tasked him the mission in Syria. Besides, Ibrahimi's recent stances at the Geneva II conference are the best proof that he has never been a mediator for solving the crisis in Syria. On the contrary, he is one of the parties that conspired against the Syrian people. This was clear in his press conferences when he refused to condemn the decision of the U.S. Congress to prove the terrorists in Syria with a state-of-the-art weapons.
That was News and Views from Damascus Radio. Damascus Radio presents Syrian Local Press Review.
Ladies and gentlemen, good evening. The local newspapers today gave prominence to the following headlines and items of news. President Bashar al-Assad receives 2 cables of congratulation on the occasion of the holy month of Ramadan. The cables came from Minister of Religious Endowments Muhammad Abd al-Sattar Sayyid and from the great Mufti of the Republic Ahmed Badruddin Hassoun. On the same occasion, the President also receives a cable of congratulation from Minister of Justice Najm al-Ahmad. The Syrian armed forces restore security to the hills, separating between the plains of Rankus and the province of Zabadani in Damascus countryside. The forces seized full control of Maqlabi Jundi and a power generating station in the 3rd region in Aleppo countryside. They also eliminate tens of terrorists, including foreigners, in the countryside of Homs and Idlib. Foreign Minister Walid Muallim discusses with Russian Deputy Foreign Minister Sergei Rapakov the means of bolstering bilateral relations. Both figures agree that terrorism is the biggest danger facing the region and it needs international efforts to combat it. And Russia's permanent representative to the UN, Vitaly Churkin, affirms that Washington pours oil on fire and derives from the political situation for the Syrian crisis. On his part, the Russian Foreign Minister Sergei Lavrov says Russia did not welcome the U.S. support of the armed protest in Syria. The dimensions of the U.S. attempt on imposing new rules of the game of terrorism on the region are getting further clearer. The U.S. denounces and offers support at the same time, combats and blesses at the same time, and it interferes and does not, and so on. The front page editorial in the Thawra Daily says that after the bloody events in Iraq, namely Al-Mosul, the Turkish and Saudi rows are crystal clear. Both plays a double role in supporting terrorism outside their hands or their lands, while they agree with the terrorists on avoiding their own countries. On the other hand, the United Nations still opposes the terrorists and the Syrian and Iraqi governments on an equal base. The UN Secretary General Ban Ki-moon openly stated that theory when he did not differentiate between the victim and the executors. He said it when requested halting the happenings in Syria and Iraq. The paper concludes.
That was a review of the Syrian local press issued in Damascus this morning.
Damascus Radio presents Welcome to Syria. A weekly program prepared and presented by Rashid Hailesh. Directed by Suhail Khouri. Ladies and gentlemen, good evening. Welcome to this new edition of Welcome to Syria. The city of Jebel al-Jatman includes a number of important archaeological hills such as Tel Ciano, where archaeological excavations have indicated the deeply rooted history and great civilizations the city saw over different periods of history. In Jebla, there is a beautiful citadel which was built at the Roman era. The citadel played a crucial role in the Syrian coast during different wars. The citadel was renovated and fortified several times due to its strategic position. In addition, the city of Jebla includes an important mosque called the Sultan Ibrahim Mosque. It is distinguished in Jebla as it is considered the oldest in Jebla. The writings inscribed on the mosque's wall dates back to 1025 AD. The mosque is characterized by its rectangular shape and decorations. The vegetal and animal decorations inscribed on the mosque shows the prodigious skill of the Arab Muslim architects. The architectural design in Jebla is distinguished for its diversity and ornaments. The city of Jebla also includes a number of old souks that reflect the commercial importance of the city. Welcome to Syria. A weekly program prepared and presented by Rashid Hailesh. Directed by Suhail Khouri.
Radio Damascus presents A Call for Justice. As the world was preoccupied with the issue of chemical weapons in Syria, the American Foreign Policy magazine has disclosed a document prepared by the CIA in the early 80s, which included estimates that talked about an Israeli project to develop and manufacture chemical and biological weapons. The document referred to the Israeli huge stockpiles of chemical and biological weapons in addition to its nuclear arsenal. It pointed out that Tel Aviv has built its chemical arsenal for more than 40 years, yet the West continues to ignore this fact. The report published about Israel's possession of chemical and biological weapons allows shedding light on the researches the Israeli government is conducted at the Secret Biological Researches Center in Nis Ziona, 20 kilometers south of Tel Aviv. American satellite photos showed that the nuclear installation in Dimona in An-Naqab desert was the site where the processing, manufacturing, and storing of such weapons was taking place. There's another storage site, the document says, 16 kilometers west of Dimona. A third, very developed special factory to manufacture chemical weapons is also believed to exist. Besides its nuclear arsenal, estimated to be 300 nuclear warheads and quantities of hydrogen bombs since the 60s and 70s of the past century, Israel also possesses, the document adds, the deadly nerve gas of permanent impact and the nerve gas of non-permanent impact, in addition to the techniques and systems of launching them. However, the American administration preferred to be silent about such facts. The formation document was the only paper discovered by a researcher at Ronald Reagan's library in California. It seems that someone from the White House had torn it off from a secret file that belonged to the Special Estimates Unit at the CIA. The file carried the title "The Danger of the Soviet Use of Chemical Weapons to American National Security," but the CIA, which was ready at the time to unveil the chemical weapons of the Soviet Union and its allies, was never ready to present any information about Israel. It even wiped out everything that had to do with Israel from its relevant archive and allowed the publication of most of the report, but kept the part related to Israel classified until it was published a short time ago, simultaneously with the issue related to the use of chemical weapons in Syria. A call for justice. Radio Damascus presents Arab Civilization. Today's edition of Arab Civilization focuses on an outstanding old art that played a big role in maintaining communication and understanding between man and his surroundings. It is the art of music that dates back to prehistory eras and has continued to develop till our present time. Music has been throughout its long history a mirror that reflects people's civilizations. The ancient Egyptian civilization is known to have played an important role in making and developing music. In the ancient Egyptian state, several kinds of musical instruments appeared. Musical bands were formed that mainly depended on singing and stringed and wind musical instruments. Music was closely connected with dancing that represented for the ancient Egyptians a symbol of pleasure and joy, accompanying religious rituals. The Egyptian court hosted foreign bands that sang and played their country's music in addition to the Egyptian bands that spread throughout the country. In Levant and Mesopotamia, the musical instruments, manuscripts, and portrait scenes discovered confirmed the belief that music had developed and prospered immensely at the time. The Greek, Roman, and Byzantine civilizations benefited from the development of music in ancient Syria, Egypt, and Iraq, and took the knowledge reached in this respect to their own civilizations. Except for some contributions and theoretical researches, the Greeks and Romans did not introduce any significant additions into the domain of music. Music was first written down in Mesopotamia and Syria. The origin of most of the musical instruments known in the Greek and Roman heritage was Syria, Egypt, and Mesopotamia. In this context, we should note that the Greek civilization had an Oriental stamp, but the Greeks' role in preserving and developing this heritage should not be denied. The excavation works in Syria, Egypt, and Mesopotamia confirm beyond any shadow of doubt that those wind and stringed musical instruments had moved to other civilizations from our countries. They were later developed to suit emerging needs. In the Greek musical heritage, one may mention some of the famous musical instruments like the lyre or the lyra. It is a stringed instrument that resembles the Egyptian or Assyrian flute. There is also the olos instrument. It is the same Egyptian or Assyrian double oboe. Its image was found carved on a set of archaeological pieces discovered in northern Syria. This applies in terms of similarity to such instruments like the trumpet, the flute, the whistle, and the drums, which moved to other civilizations, including those of the Greeks, the Romans, and others in Mesopotamia and the Nile Valley. This indicates the development of art in Arab civilization hundreds of years ahead of other nations. Arab civilization.
You're listening to Damascus Radio, the broadcasting service of the Syrian Arab Republic. Before we sign off the national anthem, here is a final look at the news summary. President Bashar al-Assad receives a cable from the first Sharia judge in Damascus, Mahmoud al-Marrawi, confirming that Sunday, June the 29th, is the first day of the holy month of Ramadan. Russian Deputy Foreign Minister Sergei Ryabkov says that Syria would be able to deter any aggression despite its elimination of chemical weapons. Foreign Minister Walid al-Muallim discusses with the Russian Deputy Foreign Minister Sergei Ryabkov the means of bolstering bilateral relations and Syria's fulfillment of the disposal of its chemical materials. Syria's permanent representative to the UN, Dr. Bashar al-Jafari, criticizes a statement made by the UN Under-Secretary General for Humanitarian Affairs and Emergency Relief Coordinator, Valerie Amos, describing it as out of context. Russia's permanent representative to the UN, Vitaly Churkin, stresses that Russia will prevent adopting any humanitarian resolution threatening sanctions against Syria at the UN Security Council. And the Iraqi armed forces start a big operation to cleanse Tikrit city in Salahuddin Governorate from the terrorists of the so-called the Islamic State in Iraq and Sham, or ISIS, belonging to the terrorist Al-Qaeda organization. With that, ladies and gentlemen, we come to the end of our transmission for tonight. Until we meet again tomorrow at the same time and on the same frequencies, we wish you all the best from Damascus Radio, the broadcasting service of the Syrian Arab Republic. Good night.